So the last thing that I want to do before we get started here is to thank Stormy for joining us this evening to educate us on Michigan's forests. So thank you for being here, Stormy.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I'm just doing, this is my first time doing this, so I'm checking to see if you actually can hear me, Melissa.
Stormy, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. How about now? I'm hitting mute.
Oh, okay. Everybody can hear you. You're good to go.
Oh, you can hear me? All right. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you for joining in with this modern technology here. This is something very new for me. I was originally going to do this program in April, Earth Day, and obviously because of COVID, everyone's life has changed, and me included. So we're doing this via Zoom. And my son asked me last night, he said, "You are going to practice, right, Dad?" Because he knows that I am not the best when it comes to computer skills. But thank you for Melissa and the library for allowing me to do this. It's a program that I've been doing probably for 20 years, a way to educate people about forestry and in more particular Michigan's forest. I would do every year I would do the biology students at the high school at Sheboygan area schools and Harbor Springs area schools to give them a taste of the forest, and they all had school forests, so that was very beneficial. And I guess with that, I've worked, as Melissa said, since 1976, graduating from Michigan State. Go Green. I can't hear a Go White, but I'm sure they're out there. And I retired 2 years ago, and I am now currently working with or volunteering forestry work for the Sleepy Bear Dunes National Lakeshore and the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, doing some work for them. Two very nice organizations to be volunteering for. So with that, I guess, Melissa, we are going to go forward with this slideshow. You might hear me say next a lot or pause because Melissa is running the screen and I'm just sitting here talking. That was very good, Melissa. Okay, Michigan's forest. That's what we're going to talk about today. And when we talk about Michigan's forest, we also have to remember it's probably the Lake State's forest too, probably part of Ontario. So our forests were kind of handled the same way a couple hundred years ago or so. So how are they? How do you think Michigan's forests are? Are they, I know we have a lot of different age people here today or this evening. Are they better than when you were young? Are they as good? So how really are they doing? And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll know. Well, let's bloody well take a hike and find out, eh? Let's just get back in the bush and just walk through the woods and see how our Michigan forests are doing. So we have to talk about Michigan forests. We have to talk about pre-European forests because people always lived here ever since man was roaming the earth, or this area anyway. There has been people living here, and they were the indigenous people, the tribes in Michigan, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, and several others that lived in Michigan at the time. So people always did live in these forests, but it was pre-European forests. So the pre-European forest is a lot different than it is today. And primarily the pre-European forest was mainly a lot of large pine. So we had white pine and red pine. There you go, white pine and red pine, and a lot of Michigan's forests looked like this prior to Europeans coming. Now, the indigenous people that did live here, they did do, we can go ahead and put the next slide there, Melissa. Like I said earlier, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and Potawatomi, and I hope I'm pronouncing the last one correctly, they lived on these lands and they did manage the forest slightly. What they did is they would start fires to create openings so wildlife would have more food in these young forests in open areas. So again, these forests were, people were here long before the Europeans. And again, our pine forests back in the day looked like this. I don't know how many people have been to white pines or Hartwood pines, I'm sorry, Hartwood pines down by Grayling and Roscommon. Not a lot of those large pines are still standing. Even the last couple of decades, they've fallen over. But to give you a small glimpse of what Michigan's forests used to look like. So pre-European map, forest map, forest type map looks something like this. Most of the lower half of the Michigan was mostly pine and scattering of pine in the UP, and then hardwoods in the southern part of the state. People did live here, as I said earlier, and they grew crops here. They, in the open areas, they burned some of the forest so they could have openings for, like I said, stated earlier, for wildlife. Again, the pine forest is what we had prior to the logging era and prior to European settlement. So Michigan's logging era started roughly about 1840 and went through 1920. They never thought the timber would run out. They thought it would last forever, but it obviously didn't. It lasted about 80 years. Large tracts of pine and hemlock and hardwoods were harvested. A lot of times just the main logs were removed and the branches and the small logs are just left there, not being utilized. It was a pretty dramatic forest that was pretty dramatically harvested, and a lot of wealth was gained by a few people. A lot of cities were developed on the lumber industry, Traverse City being one of them, Sheboygan being one, Manistee being one, just to name a few. Something else that happened between 1840 and 1920 was a lot of immigration to the United States. So people immigrated during the same time that logging period went on. And so people coming to the United States at that time in large numbers, they needed some things in which the forest either provided or the land that they grew on. So the lumber was felled to create all various types of things. Emerging cities, Chicago, Traverse City, Detroit, Cleveland, Milwaukee, all of these towns, all these small villages, all these small hamlets all needed lumber. And so the forests were there for the taking. And if you think about it, at the time, it was the right thing to do for the time, for the people of the time. They were coming to a country that had lots of open land, not open land, but land that was not taken up already. The forest needed to be cleared for several things. One of them being the major thing was agriculture and food, feed all the new people coming, or the people coming into the United States, which we all probably can say were our relatives somewhere along the line came. So during that time, it was supplying society's needs. We look at it now and we're aghast at what happened, but at the time it was society's needs. 170 billion board feet were harvested. Let me just say that's a lot of wood. It built Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and many small towns, farmhouses in between. And all those people had to eat and had farms. And so a lot of the clearing was for farmland. But it was over harvested. At the time, they thought it was what they needed to do. They needed to conquer nature so they could raise their families, have their cities, have their schools, have their homes, have their corn, have their fields. But it was over harvested and completely over harvested with really no thought to the future. And just a sidebar, all this logging that took on, these people that did this logging, they had a pretty grueling, rough, dangerous life. A lot of logging camps were in northern Michigan, primarily, and the logging really happened for the most part during the winter months. And then the people would go back to their farms and or other type of employment in the spring or after the spring log drive in the summer and things like that. So most of the logging in the beginning, especially occurred during the winter months. They had to get this lumber to water sources to float them down rivers, the Grayling River, the Manistee River, the Pigeon River, the Black River, all the rivers in southern Michigan. They had to get them to the rivers because that's how they transported the logs for the most part. Society's objective at the time was to progress society, and lack of a better term. So, building, bringing in more people and things like that. And that was kind of society's objective. Again, we needed those farmlands to raise grain and livestock and food for the emerging masses of people that we had coming to the United States for a better life. Homes, churches, schools, all of it they needed. And the lumber from those trees supplied it. But this is what was left. This is called slash. So when a logging operation is done and you don't take all of you leave the branches. Excuse me, they're having an announcement here. So hang on just a second. Thank you for using the library. Thank you. So this is called slash, and this is the branches, the tops, and back in that day, the slash would even be more because, as I said earlier, a lot of the timber over a certain size would not even be utilized. So this is what a good portion of Michigan looked like if you drew a line from Bay City to Muskegon. What happened was devastating fires. It burnt and it burnt and it burnt. And if you think about it, a lot of this pine is on sandy soil to begin with. Then you had these fires. And so the soil was pretty rough by the time all these fires went through. Fires were started by lightning. Fires were started by locomotive. Some were by human error. Some were by lightning. But we had fire after fire after fire for years and years from that line from Muskegon to Bay City, roughly up to this, even into the UP. And it looked like this, just burnt over acre after acre after acre. And so a lot of the people coming to the United States, it was an agrarian society for the most part. So everyone was in, you had to have agriculture. Well, this is pretty rough to try to grow crops to raise, supply your family with food on. So today's forests are the direct result of yesterday's actions. So the forests we have today are there because of man's actions in the past. And I think we could probably safely say that's true throughout the world. The science of forestry. I'll read it too. The science, art, and practice of sustaining, managing the forest and all the resources for the benefit of humans, wildlife, and the environment. So the science of forestry is trying to manage these forests for the benefit of a lot of different things. Forest management means more than just forest products. We think of, a lot of people think that, forests are for, foresters are thinking about just lumber and paper products and building products and things like that. And that's only a portion of it. We realize that forest management means we have to watch out for everything that's out there, all the way from endangered species to beautiful wildflowers to even game species. So forest recovery, the science of forestry in the United States, it started earlier in Europe. It came from Germany for the most part, and Finland. But the science of forestry really started in the United States about 1900. And that's when Gifford Pinchot and Biltmore Estate in North Carolina got going, and they saw that all these forests probably could use some help, some management in the Appalachians and all over. So forestry and the science of forestry in the United States really is fairly new. If you think about it, my grandfather was born in 1900, so it's not that too far removed. So I always ask when I do this to school groups if they recognize the gentleman on the left, and some do and some don't. But I'm sure a lot of you folks recognize it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He started the Civil Conservation Corps when he became in office for the recovery of the United States during the Depression. The Civil Conservation Corps was, unfortunately, for men only. It was young men that lived in camps and did various jobs, helping out, everything from building bridges to fighting forest fires to planting trees to building lodges. I think a lot of the lodges through the national parks are built, some of them are built by the Civil Conservation Corps. The number one goal in the beginning was fire suppression. So I want you to remember this date. So in the mid-30s, fire suppression was a major goal. We're still having another closing on the library. So fire suppression was the main goal of the CCC in the beginning. I mean, they did other things too, but fire suppression was the main goal. So about 1934 or so, they really started. 36. I'm not really quite sure the exact date of the CCC starting, but around that time, they did fire suppression. So there was, again, fires are still burning. They wanted to put these fires out, stop them from burning so we could start the recovery program. And part of the recovery program for the CCC was replanting. They replanted a lot of land. So between 1933 and 1942, 134,000 acres were replanted. That's a lot of acreage, and that's a lot of trees. 484 million trees were planted. I probably planted several thousand in my life, and that seemed like a lot of trees. So 480 million is a lot of trees to be replanted. So man's contribution to the forest recovery. So remember, we had the logging era, we had the fires, and now we're we're going to try to start some forest again. So man's contribution to the forest recovery basically was planting. And so if you drive around, I'm more familiar with the Sheboygan area, the north of Petoskey area, and there's some areas there that you can find that were planted by the CCC in the Soil Conservation District in later years. But I think a good portion of the national forest south of Traverse City by Manistee and such, a lot of that was planted by the CCC. And this is what it looked like, you know, this is probably 20 years ago. Those little seedlings that they planted, acre, you know, can't remember the acreage we said earlier, but those acres all now kind of look like this or larger. So after disaster, Mother Nature can work her miracle, especially in a temperate climate like where we live. So we have young, I can't point, can I? The slide on my left, you have young pine coming up. You have young seedlings coming up after this disaster. So Mother Nature really recovered a lot of Michigan's forest. So you have natural recovery, all these new forests coming up, white pine, aspen, soft maple, oaks, things like that. So we talked about what Michigan looked like and how much pine there was prior to Europeans, pre-European. Now the state looks a lot different. There's a lot less pure pine stands, especially that old pine areas, and a lot more other deciduous trees. So today's forest looks completely different than it did, 1900, 1920, or even 1950. This area here at one point was recorded being primarily a lot of old white pine and hemlock, and then some hardwoods mixed in. Through the years of the harvesting and such, it has become hardwoods for the most part. And you can see in the middle of the screen there, there's green, and that would be a planted pine plantation. And then also in the distance, you have, farmland. So the forests are a lot different than they were 100 years ago. We have the planted pine. We have natural pine forest. We have hardwood forest, which would be your sugar maples and your beech and your ash and your yellow birch and things like that. We have lowland conifers and hardwoods, which would be your cedar swamps, your balsam fir, tamarack, and with a lot of low areas.
Good evening. The library will be closing in 5 minutes. Please visit an express checkout station now if you have material you wish to borrow.
The library is going to be closing in 5 minutes. And we have a lot of aspen stands. Aspen is a pioneer species, which means after the fire, these aspen would come in and be one of the first species to kind of take hold and grow. So we currently have a lot of aspen in Michigan. And so now we have all these different stands and forest. And now what are we going to do? We're going to, do what we did before without forest management, even though that at the time was something that, they wanted to do. Well, now we have forest management. We have, we have the Society of American Foresters. We have certified foresters. We have the, Department of Natural Resources. They manage all the state lands. And we have the U.S. Forest Service, which manage all the federal lands. And then people like, and foresters like myself, we worked in the private sector a lot. So all the lands that I worked on primarily were owned by private individuals, because 53% of Michigan's land base is owned by private individuals. I believe that number's correct. I may be off a percent or two. So what is forest management? Well, this picture was taken a long time ago because I certainly look a lot younger. So forest management is in a nutshell, it's a lot of things. So I'll start in the lower lower right-hand corner, working with landowners to decide what their goals are. You know, these are private individuals. Their goals are maybe different from another private individual's. The Forest Service goals may be different from the Department of Natural Resources goals. So each owner of the land has different goals and objectives. So what a forester does is they go in and we kind of assess the stand. We see how old the stand is, what species are in the stand, the volume of the stand, what wildlife species are there, what water is in the area. So we take a really good survey of the land. We determine, you know, the diameter of trees, and we on the left, in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a gentleman using an increment bore, and that is a little drill that he goes in and he can see the core of the tree, and he can see how well that tree is doing, if it's growing well, or if it's really has tight growth rings, it's not growing well. The forest needs to be thinned out. A good portion of forest management involves logging. Not all forest management, but also a really good portion of forest management involves harvesting of some sort. So if we don't have great communication skills with the logger to carry out the tasks and the management plan that the foresters and the owners of these properties have in mind, it's all for naught, because we need to have the logger do exactly what he or she needs to do. So you have to have great communication with the logger. So now that we have these stands, how are we going to manage them? Well, red pine, all those pine plantations that were planted, well, they're managed in several different ways. You know, we go through and they're planted in pretty thick rows, pretty thick area, but the rows somewhat tight together. So in some cases, we were able to take one row, leave two rows, every other row, take two, leave three, depending on the spacing. And we were able to take those out. You know, we mark the rows and they take it out. Then after it grows a little bit more, then you mark individual trees and you thin that out. And then you keep doing that until a certain point. At one point, depending on the landowner's objectives, you can either do a complete removal of the final harvest or a final crop. Yes, I'm calling a plantation a crop because it really is. You can do that and replant, or if there's enough young pine in there coming up, then you would just let that come up naturally. So this is the stands after they've been thinned maybe two or three times. So you're starting to get a more natural type of setting you have. And then you might start getting different species in the understory, like hardwoods and things like that. So it becomes more of a natural setting, which I think is a good thing. We're good. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm having a conversation with my mom off to the side. She's telling me the library's closed, but they said we're okay. Thanks, Mom. And so we can go on to the next slide, Melissa. Okay, maybe I'll keep talking about pine now until we have a little bit of a technical difficulty here. We're stuck on the red pine slide. Oh, here we go. Maybe we're going to get some movement. We're ready to move on, Melissa. There we go. I was trying to think of a joke. Okay, and now we're going to talk about hardwood thinning. So we talked about pine thinnings and the hardwood. Now we're going to talk about hardwood thinning. Hardwoods, which are the sugar maple, beech, ash, well, not much ash anymore, but they are very shade tolerant, which means you can thin out the trees of the hardwood thinnings, and you can take a tree here and take a tree there. So what a forester does is he or she goes to the bush and marks the trees that they want to be removed. The trees may be diseased, deformed, suppressed, over mature, something like that. So there's some guidelines and there's some spacing and there's some volume per acre that foresters use to determine how much and what type of wood to remove. Hardwood thinning, on some cases, the lumber is very large and very valuable. So a lot of the very valuable larger trees are cut by hand. Probably not much, a very small percent of the wood is now cut by hand because it is extremely dangerous job. But it's also done with mechanical harvesters. And this particular machine goes in and it can snip out the tree. And I think later on we might have a video of it, but I'm not sure. It can actually reach in with that long arm, grab a tree, pull it out, and cut it to length and delimit, and do very little damage to the forest floor and to the remaining stand of trees. And then, so we thin it out, as I said earlier, because it's shade tolerant. If you look on the forest floor, you see a lot of sugar maple just looking for a little sunlight, looking a little less competition. And also in a hardwood stand, you have uneven age management, which means you have all different age class trees from a seedling all the way to a very mature tree. And this is what it looks like. This is my property in Sheboygan after a thinning. You can see all different types of age class trees. Okay, now we're going to talk about the fun one. I'm sure clear cutting does not make anyone, the sound of clear cutting really gets everyone's hackles out. But you do clear cut for some species. Clear cutting promotes regeneration. And there's several species that need to have clear cut. And one of them, primarily in Michigan, is aspen. This is an aspen stand. Aspen grows all at one time, so it's all the same age. So you can see the aspen, and it's a very short-lived species. About 6 years old, it has matured, starts falling down, things like that. You can see on the forest floor, there's trees that have fallen down, which is okay. You can have dead trees on the forest floor. That's not a problem. But if you look on the forest floor too, you don't see other species. You only see ferns for the most part, because you don't see any young aspen coming up, because aspen needs full sunlight to regenerate. It cannot regenerate unless it does not have full sunlight. So you go in and you clear cut the aspen. For the most part, you try to get as much sunlight to the forest floor. Now, in some cases, there are stands that have aspen and oak mixed in, or you would leave several oak trees per acre, depending on the species and the terrain and things like that. But in pure aspen stands, you will want to clear cut that. If you see on the end of the aspen butt logs, you can see that they're rotting and they're over mature. So aspen sprouts from the roots. So underneath the soil, 3-4 inches, can't quite remember how deep they are. You have these aspen roots with nodules on them. And as soon as the soil heats up to a certain temperature, the hormones in those nodules kick in and sprouts shoot up through the forest floor. You can't, and the best way or the only way to heat up that forest floor is through sunlight. And if you have trees providing shade, you're not going to get the heat and sunlight to open up these, get the whole process moving. So it's natural regeneration, and it happens very quickly. And this natural regeneration is very important for many things. If you look how large those leaves are, man, are they sucking in the CO2 and they're putting off the oxygen. Wildlife, it's very important for wildlife. They eat the young vegetation, and they also use it for cover. So this aspen is 3 months old. So it's about 3-4 feet now, about 3 feet tall at 3 months old. And so an aspen clear cut looks absolutely bloody horrible in the beginning, but after 3 months of a growing season, you have a new forest emerging. So the benefits of a young forest, and we will talk about the benefits of an old forest too. So it provides great wildlife habitat, it provides food, it provides cover, and it's a great CO2 absorption. And it survives so much food and cover for so much wildlife. Okay, other reasons for forest management. Normally I ask everyone, do they know what this bird is? Which I can't hear your answers, but that is yes, it's a small gray bird, as my friend used to say, but it's also the Kirtland warbler. The Kirtland warbler it lives in the Grayling Roscommon area. That's it. So it is from Michigan. There are little pockets in Ontario and I believe some in Wisconsin, but primarily its breeding and its area where it lives is the Grayling Roscommon area, and it winters in the Bahamas. But the Kirtland warbler the nesting pair needs up to 30 to 40 acres, one pair. The nest on the ground, or they need low branches near the ground. They need jack pine. They need to be 5 to 20 feet tall, the jack pine. And this bird became endangered species list in 1967. Now I asked you all to remember the date, roughly 1936, when we started doing soil conservation, or not soil conservation, the CCC started suppressing fires. Well, jack pine is a species that needs fire to grow, and not to grow, but to survive and to regenerate. The cones are called serotinous cones, and they will not open up unless you have fire. So in 1936, when we started stopping forest fires, we also had a problem with the jack pine stands getting large. They weren't burning every year, and you didn't have the young jack pine stands, which the Kirtland warbler needs. So that's in 30 years, we're finding out that because we're stopping fire, we are losing the Kirtland warbler. So several times through the years, different forestry groups, landowners tried prescribed burns for jack pine. They would burn them, log them and burn them, but a lot of people's work resumes didn't look good when some of those fires got away and created fires that burnt areas we were really particularly wanting to have burned. So we clear cut for this Kirtland warbler. Vast areas are clear cut. Now, clear cut simulates fire. It simulates wind damage. It simulates a tornado. It's just damage to the terrain. So we clear cut, and all those, most of the wood is taken out. And in the past, I believe they used to let the cones try to open on their own from the heat of summer months, but I'm not sure that's still a practice. I apologize, I'm not sure about that. But what happens then is it looks like this after clear cut, and then we go through and apply the proper force application. We plant, just like the CCC did. So they clear cut the jack pine, and they come back a year or two later and replant it. And this is what the nesting pair, 34 acres, like. They like this low, young jack pine, 20 to, less than 20 feet tall. So now our breeding pairs are doing a lot better since they've started this practice. So that's just another form of forest management. And I have this slide in here just because fuel reduction, these fires occur in some areas for a reason. They're supposed to. And so like the Jack Pine area, it really needed to, you need to have that fuel that's accumulating burned so you can have the new forest. I'm going to address forest fires here shortly. So all kind of critters benefit from, well, the environment, one, but from forest management. We all, foresters or natural resource managers, all know that there are a lot of things out there that we have to manage for, not just trees. I always used to ask the kids, so if you had my job and you're working in the bush and which one of these bears would you like to see? And they always said, oh, the cute one on the right. And I said, not me, man. I want the big one on the left because I have the 50-50 chance that it's a male and not a female with a cub nearby. So, but as a forester, those bears are out there. I'm here to tell you. And they, so that's part of the ecosystem out there as well. Elk. Michigan has an elk herd. Turkey. These are all the animals that my golden retrievers have chased over the years. We have games, deer. We have non-game species. We have insects. All these things thrive in the forest, need to thrive in the forest. So forest is for all. I mean, it's for the wildlife. It's for the wildflowers. It's for the ferns. It's for the good soil. It's really important for the water. So Michigan has water everywhere. I know that because I spent since 1984 walking in its forest, and I rarely come home with dry feet. So we have a lot of water in Michigan, and the water is very, very important. So as foresters and resource managers, we have to really pay attention to water. So when we're setting up logging jobs, for one, we really have to be cognizant of water, be it vernal ponds, be it streams, be it lakes. We don't want to do anything to put silt into that water, to damage that water, to rut up the area going to that rutted water. So we really are careful, and we have a lot of setbacks for any type of water we see. We do our first initial walkthrough management plan. We note down where are all the water and what areas we need to be very careful of. And not all forests need to be managed. Sometimes when I give this talk, I feel everyone thinks that we have to manage every forest, every acre of every forest. And that's just not true. We do have to manage a lot of our forests, but sensitive areas that are special, or just some areas we just don't and shouldn't manage. Okay, Michigan has 20 million acres of forest land, representing 53% of its land mass. What happens to a tree in Michigan each year? Well, some die, some are cut, some are added, and most of it keep growing. I have the, so a cord of wood is 4 by 4 by 8. And if you laid a cord of wood out, if you took all the wood that was harvested in Michigan, you laid it out, you would have a stack of wood 3,500 miles long. If you did that same thing with the growth, you'd have 8,000 miles long. And if you did that with all the standing volume left, you would have a cord of wood 250,000 miles long. So there's a lot of wood out there. We are up 1 million acres in our forest lands since 1980. Granted, we only have, back pre-European, Euro-American, there was 95% of Michigan was harvested now, forested. Now it's only 53%. But we also have a very large human population. We currently are only harvesting about 40% of our annual growth. I know that seems possible, but that's the truth. We are only currently harvesting about 40% of the annual growth. We do that for paper products, building products, forest products. Michigan's forest supports over 100,000 jobs and 20 billion, adds 20 billion to the economy. And this is just a fact that for you, that's not my interest. My interest is good forestry, but it does supply a lot of jobs. We use a lot of wood. Per person. If you, Melissa, could you go back one slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So per person, each individual uses one 18-inch in diameter breast height, 100-foot tall tree per year, each individual. That's 4 to 4.5 pounds of wood products daily. It could be paper, it could be cosmetics, it could be packaging, it could be lumber, it could be fuel for your wood stove, it could be cogeneration, it could be all kinds of things. Wood products are 40% of the raw materials used in the United States. You know, steel, plastic, concrete, 47% of raw material used in things is wood products. But wood products only count for 4% of the energy used to make those products. So I like to say, wood is good, man. We can go on to the next one, please. So the loss of forest land really it's due to, it's not due to harvesting, let's put it that way. It's due to population growth, it's due to agriculture, it's due to more people in the world needing forest products, not needing forest products, but needing the land in general. Every time a city expands, I went to Traverse City. I went to school here at the college, 72 to 74, and Traverse City was a fraction of the size it is now. So through time, things expand, and that's where most of your forest goes. Trees don't last forever, but forests do. I used to tell my son and my daughter that, you know, you have the last name, your last name is Stormzand. And when I pass away, you know, I'm gone, but that name and that family still keeps living on. It's the same thing with the forest. When a forest, the trees are logged, trees are die, the forest doesn't go away. It changes the age class, but it doesn't go away. Forests are forever growing and dying. The beautiful, wonderful old growth timber out west, someday is going to fall over and die. But in its replace, there's going to be a young seedling to take its spot. So forest stewardship, this is something that I think is important, a good point. So forests in Michigan really provide, or in the United States, provide fuel, they provide timber, wildlife habitat, water quality, recreation, employment, biodiversity, aesthetics, erosion control, and all that, and on top of that, help providing a product for us to use. So North America manages, the United States and Canada, we manage our forests pretty darn well. Granted, in the past there's been some mistakes, but I think since the 1970s, some really, really good steps have been taken. Other parts of the world aren't so lucky. There is no forest management. Parts of Brazil, parts of South America, Indonesia area, they're doing, they're cutting for the same reason that we did 100 years ago, for land, for families, to grow crops, to things like that. So my question is always to people, so if we're going to use wood personally, we're going to use that 4.5 pounds per day. Are we going to get it from our land, our forest, or are we going to get it from overseas or from areas where it's not managed, where it's just, and we're losing forest at a vast amount in these areas? Well, I think good stewards, if we're going to use the wood, we need to get it from our backyard. Trees versus other material. I mean, there's no trees they're renewable. They're the only renewable resource. Trees are it. Trees store carbon big time. Trees slow climate change big time. And trees, the biggest benefit trees has for mankind is they're so bloody renewable. So I like to use this exercise with the high school kids. So I would always ask someone I'm going to build you a table. What would you like me to build it out of? Well, metal. That's a good one. So I would say, so where does metal come from? And they unfortunately sometimes wouldn't know, but metal comes from iron ore, because from the ground, and you need to mine it. And the minute you mine that and use that to make that table, that iron ore is gone. You're not going to grow any more iron ore. And the other one was plastic. So if I ask the kids, thank you, you read my mind, Melissa. The other thing is plastic. Okay, if you make that out of plastic, where does the plastic come from? Again, some of them scratched their head, didn't know, but it's a petroleum-based product, and you get that barrel oil, you turn it into a plastic table, you're never going to regrow oil. Same with concrete, and a lot of people are doing things with concrete too. It's not a renewable resource either. The only renewable resource is what is good? Wood. So the minute a tree is harvested, within minutes, the possibility of and taken away, the possibility of a new tree to be in its spot is instant. The wood can sprout from the stump. It can be like aspen and regenerate. A seed, it maybe have been planted there for a very long time. An acorn may be dropped. A bird may drop leftover lunch. The potential for a new forest or a new tree is right there. And there's really good probability I can come back in within 100 years, remove a tree to use again. And so wood is truly the only renewable resource. So some tree facts. A large tree can lift a ton of water daily. Young forests are just CO2 sponges. I mean, they just really suck it up. Every ton of wood grown, a forest moves 1.47 tons of CO2. But the big thing I think is very important is carbon is sequestered in the tree, in the lumber itself. So going back to that table, the only way that the carbon that is stored in that wood is released is if I burn it or if it rots. If that tree could be here for 1,000 years and not get burnt or rot, and that carbon is still going to be sequestered in that tree. So using wood for materials is very good for carbon sequestration, and it's a hard word to say, sequestered. Wood issues, boy are there a lot of them. Climate change, it's real, and I've noticed in my coming on 50 years of working in the bush that things are changing. Tree species are acting a little different. Different types of birds are coming in. I never had a tick in my life in northern Michigan until about 10 years ago, and now they're everywhere. Things are happening. Deforestation is happening around the world on an alarming scale. And it's very critical that somehow we turn that around, because it is going to add to climate change. Boy, fire's been a big one in the news the last couple of years. Fire, I have some statistics here, so I have to read it because it's a lot to remember. Climate change is the driving force behind fires, the increased fires, the frequency of fires. It's creating more droughts, it's warmer, it's drier, the vegetation is drying out, the snowpack is less, and the fire season out west now is almost 3.5 months earlier or more than it used to be. You add to that, it's called WUI, Wildlife Urban Interface. People now are wanting to live, because it's very pretty, in areas where fires always burn and should burn. So that's a huge problem. We're living where fires always used to burn. And again, forest management, the goal of forest management forever was to suppress fires on federal lands and state lands in particular. A lot of land, most 95%, I believe, of the fires in California and Oregon are federal lands. They're not owned by the state. So for a long period of time, we went through a period started in the 70s through the 80s that people were kind of against harvesting timber. And I understand. I mean, I get that. But we needed to be harvesting that timber, because you're taking the fuel source out. Now the fuel source is huge, and climate change is a big deal. People living in these wild urban interfaces, we're going to continue to have fires like we have, and the population growth is, contributing to that as well. There was that period of low harvest on federal lands, and it's still pretty low, but we're hopefully working through that. Yeah, and that's that WUI. So Doug fir so we talked about Michigan, excuse me, aspen needs to be clear cut. Jack pine needs to be clear cut. Out west, Doug fir needs full sunlight to regenerate, so that needs to be clear cut as well. So we have species out there that need to be clear cut as well. But people living in these urban areas, wildlife urban interfaces, it's a serious threat to them and their homes, and and to firefighters' lives. So it's a huge balancing act. Trying to have clean water, all kinds of biodiversity with wildlife species, insect species, plant species, timber, and to use trees as a raw material. Remember, it's 40% of the raw material used in America. That's a huge balancing act, and that's what foresters kind of face every day, as do resource managers. So managing our forest for sustainability has always been the forester's goal. And personally, it's always been my goal. And that's what our forest, we need to be able to harvest some timber and make sure at a certain length of time, there's timber there to harvest again. So it's sustainably, it's constantly growing. And the future, the future really depends on us. It depends on what society's goals are. It depends on what person, what we deem is important to us. Do we deem, is climate change real? Is global warming real? Is CO2, a problem? All that stuff. The future depends on us, because back 100 some slides ago, I said, our forests are a direct reaction of what people did 100 years ago. Well, they're going to say that about us right now. The future depends on us, so it's how well we manage these forests. And I've been working for a very long time in forestry, and I can honestly say that I've always been proud the foresters I worked with and the way people manage their lands. There's a lot. We have more forest now than when I was young. So that, I think the second slide was, how is our Michigan forest doing? Well, they're doing bloody well, and they're doing good. And a lot of it is because of good forest management. And I have, oh, that's right, I forgot. I wrote a book too, if anyone's interested. It was kind of about my life as a forester and my dogs, and pretty near every story is about me, something stupid a guy did, and a dog. So if you would enjoy it, it's at the library here, and it's the Sheboygan Library, and it's also on Amazon.com. But I know there's a lot of questions out there for everything from, oak wilt to emerald ash borer to how we doing with our Michigan forest. And I open it up. If someone has those questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Stormy. That was some great information. I know that I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody else who was attending did also. So if you do have any questions that you would like to ask, please go ahead and put those into the chat area now. I do have one question that we received, and then I have one of my own as well. So we have one attendee who has asked, so how does one find a forester, and can you give a ballpark about how much that would cost to have a forester come and consult for the trees that are on your property? Well, and I'm sure that's probably by acre, but Yeah.
There's several avenues. There are a good place to start is your soil conservation district forester. Not every county has a soil conservation district forester, but they have lists of foresters. And a lot of times the soil conservation district forester will come out to your land free of charge, I believe, and give you an initial heads up. And then they can give you information. You can go online, I believe, and there's a whole slew of consulting foresters. And I think the DNR has a website that has consulting foresters, and it has a list of industrial foresters. I worked for Weyerhaeuser. I was their forester, and I managed private lands. So you have industrial foresters, consulting foresters, and soil conservation district foresters. The cost for that, I really don't know. I would be just really guessing if I said anything. So a good start is with your soil conservation district forester, and maybe looking online with the DNR or foresters in your area. I would highly recommend that when you get a forester, make sure you're comfortable with he or she, and use references, because like every other profession, you want to get the best possible forester for your particular situation.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Molly wants to know where the elk herd is.
It is in the Gaylord Vanderbilt area, and it's Pigeon River State Forest is where it is. And it kind of spills over into, so it's kind of Otsego County. I know it goes a little bit south into it's into Presque Isle County, and I think Mount Morenci County, and a little bit north into south into Sheboygan County. And sometimes they wander over a little bit over west of I-75 towards the Vanderbilt area, into that area.
And then she has another question, which I think is very interesting. Molly wants to know, what would a Michigan forester be doing 50 years from now? So in 2070, projecting out, what do you think the life of a Michigan forester would be at that point?
Well, I would be too old, but a life of Michigan forester, I think the species are going to be very similar for several reasons. So aspen, so you have these pioneer species, and so it's succession, forest succession. So the end product for the most part is large pine, hemlock, things like that, large hardwoods. In the beginning, you have trees like aspen, birch, soft maple, and depending on the soil and the climate, and they grow, and they succeed over hundreds and hundreds of years into a hardwood forest, then to a hardwood hemlock forest, and on. Because aspen is a very good product used in both paper and building, those aspen stands are cut every 60 years or whatever time permits. And so they are regenerated. So those aspen stands aren't turning into other stands 500 years down the road. So I think the forests are going to look pretty similar to today. I think one of the biggest issues are going to be what diseases and insects are we going to have that are going to take away the trees we have today. We currently are battling emerald borer, who's, emerald ash borer 1,000, Michigan 1. There's not a lot of ash left. They're not, ash, they're finding some disease resistant, but it's not promising. The beech bark disease, they're not finding a lot of, most of those are dying. We have oak wilt, you have some hemlock problems. So it depends on what species of disease and insect that we have introduced in the next 50 years. That will determine what our forest looks like, probably more than anything.
Thank you. So we have a question from Emanuela, and they say that the bluffs of Frankfurt are threatened by revetment and trees are being suggested as a solution. So do you know anything about that process, or do you have anything to say about trees being used as a solution in that kind of case?
What was the beginning of the question, please? Well, I didn't quite get the beginning of the question, so I can't answer that. And my Melissa has vacated her seat, so oh, she's coming back. Oh, she probably had to let someone in. So keep asking questions, please. They're good ones. So there she comes. Okay. Melissa, could you repeat the beginning of that question, please?
Repeat the question?
Yeah, in the beginning.
Yep, absolutely. Sorry. The bluffs of Frankfurt are threatened by revetment and trees are being suggested as a solution.
Okay.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Trees have historically been used for erosion control and stabilization. I don't know. I guess I'm not that familiar with it, but they have been planted throughout the world to stop erosion. And if the bluffs are being eroded via wind, water, whatever, I'm sure, getting those the big thing is getting the roots established to stop the erosion.
Great. So Richard has 8 acres and they're maple, beech, basswood, and dead ash. He plans to thin and underplant. Do you have any species of trees that you would plant to recommend?
Richard, you don't have to replant because Mother Nature will take care of that. If you have a northern hardwood stand, which basswood, beech, maple, and ash, which are dying, they're going to regenerate by themselves, and they're going to regenerate with a shade tolerant species like themselves. Beech bark disease is hitting pretty hard. So if you have a lot of ash, you have a lot of beech, and you have a lot of openings because of that, they're dying. If you're patient, Mother Nature will fill it in naturally for you, and you'll get the species that should be there naturally.
Great. Thank you. So Molly is asking, she says that her family has land that used to be a cherry orchard, Is there a way to accelerate natural succession to jump to maple and oak?
Wow. Natural succession is going to take a very long time for, I don't know if the trees are still there or not, or if they're removed, but letting it go, because I imagine it has been in that orchard situation for a very long time. So succession starts from the edges. It's going to be grasses, it's going to be brush, it's going to be small trees, and then it's going to be maple and oak. So I don't know how you could speed it up naturally, via short of planting those species.
And so there's one last question, and that's my question. And
Yes.
I would like to hear about your most, I don't know if you want to call it exciting, potentially heart racing animal encounter while you've been out working outside.
Well, it's hands down one. And I'll make this as quick as I can, but so in 1975, I was working as a young forester in Idaho. And I and another young forester had the task of the day of going and cutting down a large grand fir tree to get its cones to use, because it was a very good tree and they wanted the cones to take to the nursery and propagate and have a lot of baby grand firs that were just like this tree. So this was going to be, this area is going to be harvested anyway. So our job was to cut this tree down, and we're two 20-year-old guys. We're thinking this is a great plan. So we get there and I'm cutting, and the gentleman standing, my partner standing behind me with a hand on my shoulder. Lou is his name. And he's got his hand on my shoulder. So if he took his hand off my shoulder, I knew that something way up there was coming down. Something was falling out of the top. So about just as I finish cutting the tree, he takes his hand and he taps me and taps me and taps me. And I look up, and the tree's falling and falling and falling, and we're looking at it. And in astonishment, we look, the tree has landed, and there's 3 bear in the top of the tree, a mother and 2 cubs. And so being 20 and being young and being a guy, we giggled. And then we started thinking maybe this wasn't such a fun thing after all, because the mother made a quick check on the 2 cubs. They were fine, and she bolted towards us. And so our vehicles parked uphill on this old tote road. And so we're running uphill, giggling and laughing. And, we're 20, we're guys, we don't realize what danger we're really in. And so we're getting, and then he passes me and I pass him. And I think I stumbled, and he got there first. He opened the door. He jumped in. Oh, he went around his side, the driver's side, and he flew open the door for me. I dove in, shut the door, and the minute I got the door shut, I had I'm looking at this bear's chest, because it's standing up and it's got its paws on the truck and it's rocking it. And so we thought that was quite funny. Anyway, we drove back to headquarters, and our boss was a big old gruff guy, and he comes out and he greets us. And he's a tall man, and I'm not. So he's standing there looking at me, talking to me. And he said, "Do you have any trouble today, son?" And I said, "No, it was a great day." And he said, "Come here, I want you to see something." And I kind of had to get up on my toes and look, and on top of the hood of this old Blazer is these huge claw marks from the bear. So that was a very memorable time, and we made it. But boy, a couple seconds slower, and whew, I'm not sure. Well, I wouldn't be here right now.
Days that you won't forget, right?
No, and there's in the book I have a lot of stories like that. So
okay, so we got 2 more questions that came in. We have one person who wants to know if there are any suggestions for keeping poison ivy from invading the woods.
I have no clue, because I get it every year. I'm sure there is. I mean, I'm sure you can eradicate it. You just have to be very careful. I think poison ivy's, I think you can get it year round if memory serves me. I get it all the time. I think eradicating it is the only way. But I know I'm fairly new to this area, and I do a lot of work for the park in Leelanau County, in Benzie County, and there's a lot of bloody poison ivy there, I got to tell you. So sorry.
And one last question. Will all oak trees eventually die from oak wilt, or will some be able to survive?
I hope not. It spreads. It's been around since 1944, so it wasn't really a problem, but since 1980, it's been a huge problem. It spreads through the roots, so you have all the oak trees are interconnected through the root system. So if an oak gets oak wilt, it will transmit the disease via the root and or a wound. So that's why logging does not occur in oak wilt prone areas. Why logging does not occur during the months where the spore and the disease could spread. And I don't think it's gonna, something like white oak is a little bit more resistant to it. I don't think all oaks are going to die from it, but certainly a lot of oaks are, and they're constantly working on ways to, stop it. But when you get in a forest setting, a yard setting, if you have 2, 3, 4 oaks in your yard, you can treat those pretty successfully with chemicals and things that you do. And Camel Ross, the Soil Conservation District forester in Benzie and Leelanau, she's got a good handle on that, and that's a good contact person. You can handle that, but we're in your forest setting in acres and acres. It's impractical to do much with a disease like that. So, but let's hope that, like anything else, there might be a cure out there down the road. But I don't think it's going to get decimated anytime soon.
Okay, that was all the questions that we have, and those were some great questions. So thank you for typing those in and submitting those for us. So I'm
thank
pretty
you.
sure
Yeah,
that
thank you,
ends
Melissa.
our presentation for today.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to do this, and thank you for everyone who joined in. And be safe, please. Take care, eh?
All right, thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. We will be putting a video of this on our YouTube channel as soon as we're able to get that to process. So if you would like to revisit any part of the presentation or share it with friends who were unable to attend, we will be able to access it in that way. So thank you, everybody, for attending this evening, and thank you, Stormy, for your great presentation.
And I want to thank my one in-person audience.
A great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Mom.